do this. My first question is, who are you and where do you live?
I'm Richard Wright. I go by Dick Wright, and I live in Richmond, Virginia.
All right. What brings you here today?
Steve Ennis said I need to come up here and be interviewed by you folks, so I just came as he called.
So you're being interviewed here because you have a relationship with the Fredericksburg Rescue Squad. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with this group.
Well, I joined the rescue squad in 1956. I was probably motivated to do so by the fact that my father was an organizer and the first president of the Colonial Beach Rescue Squad. So I saw a little bit of the on a first-hand basis, what was going on there. So I joined in 56, started running calls, and had a sales job, so I could catch a lot of the daytime calls, which was always a challenge back in those days because so many people were at a workplace that they couldn't leave. And stayed around for about 10 years running calls, served in several capacities at the squad, including captain, and left here in '66 to go to Richmond and go in the corporate world.
What was it like back then, running calls in 1956 here in Fredericksburg?
Well, I think that back in those days, the volunteers were clearly relied on for any and all kinds of rescue work, not just work in automobile accidents, but we had ability to do water rescue, the ability with heavy-duty crash truck to work serious accidents where people may have been pinned in or whatever. And you didn't have paid people on site. Fire companies didn't run, so you were out there to do the entire job, whatever it may have been. And I think the life of a rescue squad member back in the 50s and 60s was a pretty busy one, but it was one that the community really admired. I think in those days, if you ran any kind of a survey and said, what organization in the area do you admire the most, I think the squad would have been at the top. It clearly had an outstanding reputation through the community. The other difference in back then and compared to now is we covered a lot of distance. We were all over Spotsylvania County. We'd go down Route 2 and 17 to right at Caroline. We'd go down to Port Royal. We'd run up north to Stafford to maybe the Crucifix, stop about there. And so we covered an awful lot of territory, and we used to hate to get a call to Brokenburg because that meant you had about a 2-hour job on your hands to get there and back and do whatever you had to do when you got there. The other thing that was probably different in those days, and we watched this progress over the years, invariably, if it was somebody really seriously injured, we'd back up to Mary Washington, and almost before we could get them off of our stretcher, they'd say, take them to Richmond. And so that meant we had, and that's prior to 95, so here we go roaring down Route 1 and through Richmond with virtually any and all trauma. And we worked over a period of time, and I remember it almost got out of hand to where virtually every injury was ended up going in those days to Richmond. And so we finally prevailed upon the medical staff and whatever.
Sorry, can you walk to start that?
Sorry about that. He's light.
I blew the system, huh?
You did.
Yeah, well,
It's electric.
Yeah.
It was where I think you started with saying invariably we had to end up going to Richmond.
Yeah, to Richmond. But one of the things that we decided we were going to do is say, all right, we'll go to Richmond, but there'll have to be a nurse or a physician riding with us to be in charge of the patient. That didn't go over too well at the hospital initially, but we just felt that there was a level of competence in the emergency room. Some physicians, and I could call names, but I don't think that's appropriate, would jump right in and take care of virtually anything and everything it seemed like. And then there were others that would take one quick look and say, send them to Richmond. So that was an issue we had to put up with, but it worked out, and now, of course, the whole scheme of things is different because of the care you can get here at the local hospital.
You did this for 10 years. It's a stressful job. I mean, in dealing with that, you say just the levels of trauma that you have to deal with. Why did you do it?
Oh, gosh, my wife would ask that question many times when I'd get up from a dinner table to take a call. I think I was in a security force in the military and saw some trauma, if you will, and whatever, and always felt like it would be doing good work, if you will, to help out people that needed help. And so it became really a motivating kind of thing in my life to give back something to the community. And there were those days, though, that were really stressful, especially if there were children involved. That would always tug at your heartstrings. And I know when I left, I was probably averaging 500 calls a year. And again, a lot of that was I could leave my day job because it was no problem. I was out on my own doing my own thing.
Do you still have a relationship with the rescue squad?
I do. I am a life member, so that is what's that's worth. But I'm a member of the Squad Foundation, so maybe once a quarter I'll get up here to meetings and help take a look at how the funds are being invested and so forth.
Take a drink.
Yeah.
One thing also, just do your best to ignore this camera.
Yeah, you just look right into this one right here.
Yeah.
Okay. Talk a little bit about what you think this this rescue squad meant and means to this community.
Well, I think I like to say the consumer has demanded and expected better service, so therefore you have paid EMTs, if you will, answering calls throughout the state in places that back in the 50s and 60s you had no paid responders, except, of course, the fire companies. And as I mentioned earlier, they did not run with the squad in those days. So I think as times change, the volunteer work becomes less not appropriate. I don't like the word appropriate, but less visible out in the community, because here comes the fire company on a call, here comes an EMT with a paid 2 or 3 people or whatever it may be. And I think it still means a lot. Now, I've been away from Fredericksburg for a long time, but as I get back up here on occasion for family gatherings and business meetings, I still hear really good things about the squad. And I've noticed where I live in Richmond, of course, in the city they have purely a paid service there. In Henrico County, where I live, they still have a couple of viable rescue squad calls, but every fire company now is in the process of putting in advanced life support, and fire companies have taken over all of the heavy rescue, if you will. So I think, though, that is a long answer to a simple question. I think people still look up to the squads. My generation remembers back when it was the only thing. I think the younger generation maybe not quite as much so, because they know there's a fire company out there coming, or a paid EMT if they make that call.
What can you tell me about this building? For the life of me, I can't remember what year it was built, because I've heard it twice today already.
Oh, golly, we need to resurrect Key Howard. He was an active member and probably the moving force behind this building and its development. And we built it, I'm trying to remember, it was probably in the mid-50s, maybe early 50s, 53 to 55, somewhere in that range, I think, and the historians can look that up and you can get a precise number. Little bit of a contentious relationship with certain people in the community, saying that we were going to put bricks and mortar on this property that was a park for the community. But again, the squad in those days was extremely popular, and we had no problem with the political arena coming around and allowing the building to be built. I think in its early days, and I mentioned a name, and that particular person would absolutely make sure we kept this building looking spotless. I mean, he was a stickler for everything being in the right place, and so all of us got caught up in that, and we were proud of this home and worked to keep it looking, if you will, really good. parenthetically, there was a need for a new fire station that came along somewhat after this building was built, and there was a group, and I just happened to be involved in that group, that thought right next to this building would be a good location, good central location. But the various organizations that didn't like that idea rallied support, and of course, that didn't come to pass. So it's had a pretty good history, I would say, to answer your question that way.
What did it mean to you to be a captain, to be one of the officers?
Well, I think the captain's role in my day, and actually I filled in, we had a fellow named Andrew Holmes, went by the name of Jake, that was a captain, and I was the first lieutenant. Well, Jake worked the night shift at Lawton as a supervisor of prison guards or whatever. So the one thing was I had to run the meetings. And meetings in those days could get pretty interesting. You always have strong opinions because it was a strong group of men. I should point out in those days it was all men, and we moved fast forward to take that issue under consideration. And so to be captain, you were pretty well called on to make sure that the organization was doing what it was supposed to do in terms of making sure the finances were handled correctly and that the meetings were run correctly and the equipment was being taken care of. But you had a good group. You had, in those days, we had a first lieutenant, second lieutenant, and then some sergeants, and the organization functioned, as I recall, very well.
Talk a little bit about had it was on the tip of my tongue and now it's gone. Are you proud of the work that you've done?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think I can think back of different calls. I like to say I participated in 14 deliveries of babies, including one set of twins on a snowy night in Stafford. And I think they named one of them Richard and the other one Warren after me. As a matter of fact, prenatal care didn't exist in that particular house. And so when I told the father there was another one, he said, "What in the world?" I thought he was going to pass out. But yeah, you could sit here all day and think about memorable calls. And I would say you'd come back off of most of those calls, other than where there were young children injured, feeling like you'd done some really good work. And you'd feel good about that, but you'd be really hurting inside. Remember a couple of young girls that were in a flash fire down in White Oak. And I think one of them died. We got them to the hospital okay, but they were so horribly burned, and you don't get those out of your mind real quick.
Do you view this, especially you spent 10 years here and then what you've done after that point, do you view this as a family?
Absolutely. I speak well to the 10-year period because I was up here and involved in it. And it was a family. We were all pretty good friends. We could sit down and play some gin rummy downstairs with some of the guys. The women's auxiliary was extremely active. We had some good times together, whether it be a crab feast, and the annual banquets were always really interesting. Back in those days, they were held down at the then Princess Anne Hotel, which is now Office Bay. And I never will forget, after every banquet, and we usually had music and some dancing, there would be a group that would get up and sing. And a fellow named Key Howard and Elwood Garrett were the two best voices, and then a couple of us would come tag along, and we'd always end up by singing "Let Me Call You Sweetheart," because we had again, back then it was all men, and we had our wives there at that. So yeah, I think it was clearly a close-knit group. I consider, thinking back in those days, some of those guys were really, really good friends.
What do you want people to know about this place? I mean, you can talk about memory from way back when, or just how it's grown to this point. What would you want people to know about Fredericksburg Rescue Squad?
I think the best answer to that is to know of the work that the squad does, the kind of work that they do. And hopefully come to appreciate it. It's, as I say, as times have changed, the amount of work and the kind of work has changed dramatically in my judgment. So I think that would be the answer to that question, is that, hey, these guys and gals are out there still running calls. They're still helping people that need help, and it's a really good altruistic approach to humankind, if you will.
Steve? Ken?
What do you see as maybe some future, where do you see the foundation fitting in as time moves forward?
Yeah, I couldn't hear that. I've got to.
Where do you see the foundation fitting in as we move forward?
Well, I think the foundation, of course, is responsible for the squad funds, other than operating funds, and we contribute to that. So I think that the foundation is set up to protect those funds, to make sure, number one, they're invested wisely, and that means that we pick good investment managers and occasionally look over their shoulder. And we've got a diverse group there. Some of us have a financial background, some do not, but have good backgrounds in other fields. And then I think, too, the foundation has a bit of an oversight, from my point of view, responsibility to make sure that the funds that we pass on to the squad for operating and other expenses are done so in a prudent fashion.
What kind of training did a squadron have to have when he was serving?
Okay, yeah, you can answer.
Yeah, that's a real good question. The training, again, in those days compared to today, was nowhere near as intense. But we required a standard and advanced American Red Cross first aid course to be passed. And so a lot of the training was on the job, if you will. But we also had medical advisors that would come in on occasion, not every month. And for instance, in the obstetrics world, they would talk about this is the proper way, because you're out wherever you might be, to finish a delivery. Or if you will, if it was 2 blocks from the hospital, you didn't have to finish and just take them right to the hospital. So a lot of on-site training in terms of material in the ambulances. We did regular training drills. In the items in the crash truck, same way. We learned to use the jaws of life. So I would sum it up by saying most of the training in those days was on-the-job training.
Did you ever think, man, why do I do this? Because you talked about some of these traumatic calls. Did you?
Oh, I think, good heavens, I sit here all day. I remember one call in particular. An airplane went down in the Providence Forge, Virginia area. And in those days, we had 2 civil defense pieces of equipment here, a very heavy-duty rescue truck that was like a tank going down the road. But then we had a smaller international model truck that was built up real high. And we got the call to work that call, and we had the only vehicle that could make it into the site of the crash. And I remember that I particularly drove that vehicle, and Andrew Holmes in front of me cut down a couple of small trees with a chainsaw. And the plane crashed and killed all 48 aboard. It was a Capital Airlines plane. And so, you know, you came away and say, hey, the rescue squad got a vehicle on site that became the command center for the next 1 or 2 days. We left it down there for the transportation board and others to have a place to work from. But there, gosh, all kinds of calls. We've had, I know personally I participate in several 6 fatality calls. That would get your attention, of course. And one in particular call went into a pond down at, I think it was called Coleman's Pond in those days. The dam broke, and now I think it's just a creek. And so when we finally got the car up, there were 6 fatalities. And so we come on back to the building, and late that night I get a call. You need to go back because there was a 7th person in the car, and some way they got out, so we had to go down and drag the pond, and in a matter of a few minutes we found a 7th body. So you could go on and on about serious calls that all of us have seen over those years.
When you describe things like that and you keep going back, I think doesn't it take a special person to do what you did and what all of these folks do?
In one word, the answer is yes, because there have been times, and when we, in those days, took in a member, it was on a probationary basis for, I think it was 90 days. And I can remember 1 or 2 occasions when I might have a a probationary person with me. And at the end of the call, it was pretty clear that that person didn't have the stomach, if you will, especially if it was a serious call, a lot of serious injuries. But I would answer it that yes, the rescue squad group are very special people. They're dedicated to what they do. They work to do it efficiently, and I think most of them, us, would feel like we have given a little something to the community to make it a better place.
Anything else?
Enough said?
You're done.
All right.